You're listening to Nightlight Radio Network. This is Dr. Bob Hieronimus, co-host of 21st Century Radio. We are happy to present this rebroadcast of our show on Nightlight. Well, for over 40 years, a major part of my life has been researching the involvement of secret societies and the creation of the United States of America. And during the late 60s and early 70s, there was a complete dismissal by the establishment's historical researchers of secret societies having, well, they said basically they didn't have anything at all to do with America's founding. Well, I think they were a little bit wrong there. Well, however, it wasn't until 1974 that I began publishing my research, only because no one else would challenge the establishment historians about the importance of the secret societies that they believed that had little or no value. And, who did we challenge? We challenged the State Department, the Department of Interior, and the White House. But by 1976, President Ford used my research in one of his bicentennial speeches, and by 1981 I completed my doctoral thesis at Saybrook Graduate School, and which was basically reprinted in the Congressional Record repeatedly. And believe it or not, in 1982, President Reagan took an interest, and by 1984 to 86, Zahara and I were nearly successful in having a die cut for the reverse of America's Great Seal. Reagan was for it, as were Senators Barbara Mikulski, Don Edwards, Charles McMathias, but all those efforts came to naught because of fundamentalism and fundamentalist conspiratorialists who were convinced. They actually were convinced, and they had the Republicans at that time convinced that the reverse of the Great Seal was a symbol of Satan. And in 1989, Destiny Books published my work, America's Secret Destiny, which included the importance of the League of the Iroquois nations' influence on the Founding Fathers. Nearly 20 years later, Founding Fathers, Secret Societies, Destiny Books, and United Symbolism of America by New Page Book came out to counter the misinformation found in the works of Dan Brown, National Treasure, which were not meant to be historical works, but entertainment. But a lot of folks on the internet didn't think that. But there's still, again, no mention of the importance of the League of the Iroquois on the Founding Fathers, and that may take other researchers in Hollywood another decade to write about. That's unfortunate, really is. But today, there are a growing number of responsible researchers who have made contributions to a re-examination of America's symbols and those who created them. Fortunately, having worked with the History, National Geographic, and Discovery channels, as well as the British, German, and Russian television. Yeah, I know you haven't seen the British, German, and Russian TV stuff yet. Maybe they'll send it over here. We'll see about that. I have been able to recommend many authors, and in a matter of weeks and months, you'll be able to view them and more pieces of this mysterious puzzle. Talking about this particular research, America's Secret Destiny. And in a few weeks, we begin again with Canadian TV and their special on America's symbols and their meaning. And a couple of months ago, I had the privilege of reviewing a to-be-released book that we are going to discuss this hour. It's called The Secrets of Masonic Washington, a guidebook to signs, symbols, and ceremonies at the origin of America's capital. And it's by James Wasserman and published by Destiny Books. I enjoyed this immensely, not only because it was very much needed, but as usual, James Wasserman's scholarship and insistence on accuracy will make this book a kind of book that anyone visiting D.C. should have. I'm going to be using it when I hang out with the Canadian crew in a couple of weeks. I'm going to be pointing to it. I'm going to be showing it because this book it's just beautifully laid out. It's got great information, that's true, but it is, from an aesthetic point of view, it's heavenly. Hey, I guess that's not very scientific, is it? But it's layout and design, full-color photographs, maps. They are so carefully positioned that it will reintroduce you to our nation's capital in a way that will re-inspire your faith and love of America. Now, James Wasserman is author of the best-selling The Templars and Assassins, the Militia of Heaven, The Mysterious Traditions and Illustrated History of Knights Templar, and The Slaves Shall Serve, Meditations on Liberty. A longtime student of occult sciences, a member of the secret Ordo Temple Orientis since 1976, and he lives in New York City. James and his wife Nancy, who is the author of Yoga for Magic. As a matter of fact, even in this particular book, I believe Rachel Wasserman, I guess that must be his daughter, assisted one of her photographs. It's almost like a family production, but it's more than that. He's joined us several times in recent years. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio, James.
Hi, Bob. What a pleasure. Thank you so much for your kind introduction.
Hey, was it Rachel? Is she your daughter?
Rachel is my daughter, and she took the most amazing photo of the Jefferson Memorial. It was just like one of those wonderful things.
Yep, that's the reason why I wanted to mention that. It's it's just so wonderful to see a family that is geared towards that kind of this kind of enjoying life from that perspective. It's very rare in this country. Of course, I'm sure you're aware of that. Now, congratulations on such a superb guidebook. You note that Washington, D.C. is the central shrine of America's national religion. What do you mean by that? What is our national religion?
Well, Bob, if I may, let me start out by thanking you for your research and your contribution to the book. Not only did you correct some of my errors, thank God, before it went to press, but you also inspired me with the integrity of your research.
Thank you.
And what I mean by America's religion is the concept of individual liberty, the concept that our rights come from God, and the concept that with us, government is designed to stay out of the way of our rights and actually stay out of the way of our creativity, allowing us to function unhindered and unhampered by interference from, our leaders. It's a very humble form of government, and it could only have been established by and for a free and moral people.
Well, the Freemasonry itself, I think, is grossly misunderstood by so many people. But you have done I guess maybe it's 15 or 20 pages. You have been able to summarize with gorgeous illustrations. I mean, this has to be one of Inner Traditions and Destiny Book's most beautiful of all publications. They pulled out all the stops, and obviously, if it weren't you writing this book, I don't think that would have happened. I know I don't expect you to comment on that, but the quality of your research and how it's so well received than the rest of the planet must have in part convinced them that. I don't know how many color pages you got in here. That costs a great deal. And the way you laid it out, I wish we could spend time on that because I just love design of books. But this is just, it's over the top from that standpoint. I think
it's so much fun that we share the same publisher and that we share this kind of respect for Ehud Sperling and Jeannie Levitan and crew Cynthia Fowles. They're just like really wonderful people, and they've just, they're so encouraging of your work and mine, and it's great. I love the covers that they've done for your books. Look really good, I think, and it's a lot of fun working with them. And
it's not just the layout. I've got friends. Look, I got to tell you, when you go to the back of this, take a look at the directory of sites. I mean, there are ways to find certain pieces of information repeatedly in different ways. Which means that when I'm standing there in 18 degrees in Washington, D.C., pointing to something, I can, and the book is, if you would have made this book too small, it would have been impossible to be able to read like that. I mean, it's the whole thing from A to Z. A bunch of Virgos must have done this book, is all I can say.
Well, I did most of the photography in February of last year, and the wind was blowing so hard, it was a miracle I could even stand up. I mean, it was just incredible.
Well, touching on Freemasonry, tell us a little bit about Freemasonry from the standpoint of what it really is all about.
Well, it's a mystery school, obviously. I think we both agree with that. I think what makes it so interesting is that it really is a kind of spiritualized voice of the Enlightenment. And, that to me makes it so appealing because during the period of the Enlightenment, European society moved, away from the horrific shackles of superstition and the powers of the kingship and hereditary royalty, the iron death grip of aristocracy on the population, and they really started to break through with some new ideas and the concept of things like the consent of the governed and the rights of man, the political rights, and equality of the sexes, the importance of education, the acceptance of science as opposed to superstition. People like Galileo and Giordano Bruno. It wasn't too long before that they were either imprisoned or executed for their scientific researches. The Enlightenment was an amazing bursting forth of the creativity of the European soul. But it lacked spirituality. It lacked that fundamental sense of awe and beauty at God's will and that whole mysterious process by which we celebrate the divine, and in that sense it was lacking. It was dry. It didn't have everything that was needed for, a successful program for a really aware person. And Masonry added that. It added the spiritual dimension within the Enlightenment freedom. At least that's the way I see it.
No, I think you're right. I like that phrase you use, spiritualized voice of the Enlightenment, because, Enlightenment was basically a part of separation of church and state being really key. But
absolutely. Then
what happens after you separate them,
Right.
Then you could be taken over by something else.
Absolutely.
So, but the Enlightenment, you say, was actually not an event, but a way of thinking.
Absolutely. It was a development from, what we would call the Renaissance and a development from, the Protestant Reformation and the whole Rosicrucian movement of, the earlier period. I trace a lot of this development to the Knights Templar and the Crusades, during that period, because that's when it really started to break apart. I think during the Crusades, when we became so closely intertwined with, Oriental cultures, I think Europe lost its isolation and the kind of barbarianism that had been so prevalent, and it just developed and developed. Now a lot of people say and believe that Masonry dates back at least to the Templars and the Crusades. I don't know that I totally accept that, but I certainly believe it's quite possible that early forms of Masonry could trace back to the Knights Templar, escaped Knights Templar.
Mm-hmm.
But that's speculation. We don't really know. What we do know is that in, what was it, 1650 or something, Elias Ashmole joined the Masonic Lodge, and he was not a stone worker. Mm-hmm. And as far as we know, he was the first one to do so in England.
Well, I like this section very much. I think a lot of individuals will really understand Freemasonry a lot better in just a good 10, 15 pages. And I've just like you, I've read a lot of books in this area, but they've never been that succinct in being able to specifically say where the changes and when the changes took place. Now, we're going to take our first break of the hour. When we come back, we're going to talk about the social effects of Masonry. And this too, friends, is one of those particular topics that are usually not discussed in most of the works that I've read dealing with this particular area. Our guest is James Wasserman, The Secrets of Masonic Washington, a guidebook to signs, symbols, and ceremonies at the origin of America's capital. It's published by Inner Traditions and Destiny Books, 1-800-246-8648. Please go to James Wasserman, spelled Wasserman, books.com. James, have you had enough time to study up on the social effects of Masonry?
Well, sure. There were quite a few, weren't there?
Sure were, yes.
You kind of, I was thinking about the, just the effects it had in the early colonial economy of America. It made such a difference for people to be able to travel to strange places, doing business, engaging in commerce, manufacture, and trade, and be able to find people that they could more or less trust and know that they shared common ideals together with perfect strangers, and generally receive hospitality, and a whole lot of other stuff. I think it was what I found was a tremendous vibrancy that Masonry played in early America.
I'll say, with the founding of educational institutions and the other work. I mean, when I think of Freemasonry, I can't help but think of Uncle Ben Franklin and the U.S. Post Office and the water systems, the lighting systems. I mean, these are the things that Freemasonry was so important, and especially in regards to the founding of this country. I mean, you got to have safe streets to walk in, friends, or else you. And we had some pretty messy streets during that time period, to say the least. As you refer to, the swampiness of that particular of Washington D.C. Now,
I was astounded to learn. I did not realize before I started this book that Franklin was such an anti-slavery guy.
Yeah,
I didn't know how powerfully he in particular felt against slavery, and how carefully he had designed a program for liberation and education of former slaves, if he had been able to be successful in that.
Well, I know that his relationship with the League of the Iroquois lectured to him on that. They basically said to the founding fathers, there's two things you got to do, besides other things that they discussed. One is to eliminate slavery and to have women involved in politics. And that, of course, we rejected both of those.
Well, I tend to think, this is kind of an argument of the glass being half full or half empty. I think what happened at that time, Bob, and you're certainly very familiar with the tensions that were existing then. We were at war, and we needed to get everyone working together toward the same end, and that end was actual physical survival. Against bullets and cannonballs and fire and troops. And I think that some of the issues like slavery, some of the arguments that I know that we've both read where, in the Continental Congress and later on where they were pleading to end slavery, just pleading and saying how God would punish America if we did not free the slaves. But in order to get that mutual pact of self-defense, compromises needed to be made, and those social advances were put on the back burner. And you know what? We succeeded. Not only did we succeed in ending slavery, but we helped to end it throughout the entire world.
That's absolutely correct. I think that's one of the most important things about the founding of this nation, is acting as a guide for the rest of the planet and republic forms of government. Why do you believe? No, we're going to be running out of time if I don't get on the walking tour. Because that is the fun, as my daughter used to say, the funnest part of this.
I got to just say, if I may, by the way, add one other thing, Bob, is that you were the person who taught me about the Iroquois alliance. I had no awareness of that before I read it from you.
Well, we're trying to get Hollywood involved, and yes, we know that they're going to mess it up one way or the other. But at least, I mean, the documentation is overwhelming since 1990. I mean, even our first president, Bush 1, supported that particular philosophy. Rush Limbaugh got very angry at him because of that. Because Rush Limbaugh kept saying basically that these were savages, and what the heck, they didn't invent any cars, airplanes, or TVs, so what good are they? And it's really it certainly has slowed things down as far as radio talk shows go anyway. But this is called Masonic Washington. Why do you call it Masonic Washington?
Well, we were trying to give a context for what I called earlier, the national religion of America. Mm-hmm. Masonry is non-denominational. It's the kind of thing that exists throughout the world. It can be Hindus or Muslims or Jews or Christians, Catholics, Protestants. Any denomination, what is required is a belief in God. And I think that, in my book, of course, I talk about, some of the American Indian Masons and, the Black Masons. And Masonry is an all-inclusive ideal. And the relationship between the esoteric symbolism and the spiritual destiny of America, which you've dealt with so much, is just they're totally entwined. In other words, how do we explain the symbols? I personally am not a Mason, so why would I call it Masonic? Well, I call it Masonic because Masonry has been a fundamental underpinning of American society since 1700.
And if you take a look, especially we're going to touch on some of the buildings within the mall, there is a very large percentage of those who designed the various buildings that were Freemasons. There's no question about that whatsoever.
Nope. The architects, the designers, one right after the other, right up to the Mellon was
yes,
Freemason.
Mellon, yeah.
Just all over the place.
Well, let's get on a little bit of that walking tour before we have to take our break within 5 or 6 minutes. There's a section dealing with a walking tour of the Capitol. It's truly exceptional, not only because of the research, but the way it's laid out. I mean, this is truly a guidebook, which is, a lot of people talk about stuff like that, but, I was just so impressed by the way this was laid out. It's functional, it's useful, and I can't wait to start showing it to the Canadian TV people in a couple of weeks. Maybe they'll give you a call on this. I hope. That's my reason for doing that. But I want them to be able to see that, yes, indeed, there is reliable research that goes through all of these different sections. So let's take a little bit of time on this little tour here, the Capitol area. Boy, what treasure trove of esoteric and Masonic symbolism do we find in this area you call the capital area?
Well, we start out in my book with that phenomenal statue of Garfield, President James Garfield, right?
Yeah.
And he was a Mason, he was a president, he was a member of Congress, and he was a military leader. His particular blending of those three aspects of patriotism, I think, speaks so highly of Masonry. And if you look at the imagery of that statue, you find that we're dealing with mythology. We're dealing with, this kind of breathtaking astrolabe thing. I don't show the astrolabe too closely because I didn't have room for it. But you see the scholar, the warrior, and the legislator.
Yeah.
And you see this magnificent sense of readiness, of seriousness, and of fairness. This sense that people are entitled to a government in which they have a voice and in which there's a process of integrity. We have the three graces in the Bartholdi fountain. What an amazing statue that is, and designed by the sculptor of the Statue of Liberty.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
Just breathtaking.
The Bartholdi. You have things within here that I'm certain that most other individuals who have looked at this area didn't consider. The Bartholdi fountain, for example. The whole section you have dealing on the apotheosis of Washington by the artist Constantino Brumidi. And that was in 1865. Could you tell us a little bit about what is being said there in the dome? This huge 4,000, I think it was 4,700 square feet, something like that.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's just amazing, and I know that you've seen it so many times yourself. It's got a archetypal celebration of the facets of civilization that go to make success. I point out that we have war, Columbia, or armed freedom, obviously an important part of security. We have science. We have Neptune showing the control of the seas. We have Mercury, with his speedy commerce all around the world. We have Vulcan teaching us to build and to craft. We have Ceres teaching us how to raise crops and feed our people. These surround this beautiful image of Washington ascending to heaven. Surrounded by the 13 states, surrounded by these graceful figures that are just putting out so much potent spiritual energy toward a man who recognized the divine intervention in the founding and establishment and survival of America.
And just all of this is below the dome. And my favorite statue of all. And who is that? Who is that?
Your favorite statue?
Yeah. What do you think my favorite statue is?
Well, I'm wondering if it's the car of history, or if it's going to be, armed liberty.
Armed liberty.
It is. I knew it. Okay, because she has the Indian headdress.
Oh yes, with that eagle on the. You have other pieces of information here that I think a lot of people would love to know, such as, after the creation of the Statue of Freedom by Crawford on top of the Capitol, she was 19 and a half feet tall.
Right,
and then
right.
then you note that no other statue is allowed to be over 19 feet. The reason why I was so excited about that, because I didn't put it all together, but when I was at the Jefferson Memorial, and they stopped him at 19 feet. I believe, and I thought, what? Why? And I saw these patterns. It's only when you look at the repeated symbolism over and over, and it's like a book. Washington, D.C. is like a book. It's like a movie. It's like so many things that come to life about our great nation. And I mean, just extraordinary stuff. Now, we need to take a break, and when we do, we're going to come back. We're going to go to one of my other favorite ones. Very few people talk about this. At the Union Station, we're going to talk about the victim of communism piece. Just extraordinary because of our links to some of the individuals that partook in Tiananmen Square, and some of them, of course, lost their life. And, of course, the statue lost its life, too, after I think it only lasted 6 or 7 days. But we'll be back with our guest, James Wasserman, The Secrets of Masonic Washington, a guidebook to signs, symbols, and ceremonies at the origin of America's capital. Inner Traditions published it.
This is Dr. Sally Rhine Feather, the daughter of Dr. J.B. and Louisa Rhine that started the ESP research at Duke University. And I have just appeared on the Bob Hieronimus show. I think this kind of radio does so much for the public. It brings them information where they can get no other way.
James, we're taking a look here at the Union Station section, and I'd like to talk about the Victim of Communism Memorial. Now, the reason why this is so close to us here at 21st Century Radio is I did a mural called Little Help from Our Friends, and we put one of the Chinese who literally were standing in front of those tanks. Fortunately, he didn't get run over like some of the others, but he got locked up and beat up for a number of years, Liu Gong. And every time I see this statue, it really touches me deeply. Please tell us about it.
Well, let me tell you that I heard about the statue when it was being erected. At the time that it came up, they didn't even have a map of it, So I went. I finally did get a kind of an address for it, and was like searching around like a nut, asking everybody I could see on the street if they knew where it was. No one knew it. I think it's the first time it's been in a book that I know of, at least. And it's this kind of small but beautiful statue of a woman holding a torch, very reminiscent of the Statue of Liberty. And what it is a copy of the 33-foot statue that was erected in Tiananmen Square in 1989 by the students. They made it of styrofoam and paper mache over a metal armature. And this one, of course, is made of bronze. It's a real statue. What's fun about this one is it celebrates President Reagan's tear down this wall speech. The authorizing legislation was signed by President Clinton, and the statue was dedicated by President Bush just last year. So it really brings Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and liberals together in an amazing way. And the students were putting forth what I would call a prayer that one day the Chinese people themselves could erect a monument of freedom in their hearts first, and then in a real statue that would survive the tanks later. And this statue is the most inspiring memento to the ideal of human freedom that I've seen, and at the same time it's a very important acknowledgement of the absolute horrors of the communist tyrannies that littered literally the 20th century.
And thank you for that last paragraph telling us just how horror-filled, 100 million victims of communism. Ukrainians starved to death in Stalin's Great Famine. The Russians killed in Stalin's Purge. The Lithuanians, Latvians, and Estonians loaded onto cattle cars deported to the Arctic Arctic, friends, death camps of Soviet. I'm just amazing. Amazing. I'm so glad you put that in there.
I'm so
now,
happy that you're pointing this out, Bob. It's really it's a very unknown little thing, and I just hope that through this show and your excitement and my putting it in here, it becomes an important shrine to lovers of freedom.
Well, friends, when you get a copy of this book, go to page 105. You'll find out exactly where it's located, right next to the Georgetown Law Center and the Superintendent of Documents, and right across from the National Postal Museum. Wow.
It's a lot smaller than it looks in my book, Bob, as you well know.
Right, okay. All right, so it's a lot smaller. But, I mean, that's the wonderful thing. And the publisher and yourself had the wisdom that when you're pointing something out and you're putting a map down there, you change the color of that particular area so that you can see it. And it stands out. I mean, that's the thing, the subtlety of each page, the way it's laid out from the very top to the bottom, where they give the page number and the Masonic symbols up there. I mean, it's just wonderful. Color-coded. It's the kind of thing that a top-notch publisher with a top-notch author really deserves, that kind of thing, and seldom gets. Because
you just mentioned the name Jeannie Levitan, and that's one of the heroines of this book. Okay, she was just the most magnificent editor, and really, really helped to present this in a coherent way to all of us.
I am just amazed at the numerous full-color pages. There's full-color pages throughout. This is rare. This is truly rare. Especially in this particular topic. This is done up in a really quality way. And now, the Federal Triangle, we need to touch on that. Yes, we're running out of time, but the Federal Triangle, tell us why it's called as such, and where do we find it? On page 115, friends. If you are psychic, take a look at this one, 115, page 115 there.
Well, it's right in the center of the kind of governmental hub. It's formed by the radiating arms of the essential street design of the city, and it's the home of kind of like the bureaucracy, I guess you could say, right?
Yeah.
And the IRS building is there, the Department of Commerce and Interstate Commerce Commission, and the National Archives are also there. We've got the old post office there. And now the new Ronald Reagan International Trade Center is there as well, and it's got the most astounding metaphysical symbolism. I mean, my mind was blown. It's got fire, air, earth, and water. It's got mythological creatures, winged horses, angelic beings.
Yeah.
It's got these magnificent astrological symbols and these ancient archetypal wisdom symbols, the history and the future. Unbelievable.
Well, I really appreciate when you did the 4 elements, and you explained the 4 elements and their importance. This is rarely done, friends. It really is. And then you illustrated it not just with one of the pediments, but that showed all 4 elements, but others, which really got the point across.
Bob, I couldn't believe they were there. I was looking at them. I was just going, this just can't be. It's amazing. I mean, I'd seen some of it in books and research myself. I had done a lot of work prior to my going there, but when I was actually looking at it and taking the pictures and seeing the intricacy of these things, it seemed like it was remarkable. It was just breathtaking, because you have the Tarot, the Kabbalah, alchemy. You've got every single aspect of the occult. Astrology is resumed within the 4 elements.
Well, that's one of these. This is such a beautiful work. I'm sorry to say so many nice things about it, friends. I know you're tired of hearing about it, but the thing is that this is the best there is, period. And I can't wait to put one of these in the hands of David Ovison. He's going to love this.
Oh, his book was so helpful to me. His book was so helpful, and I really wish that you would extend my thanks to him, because he did a magnificent job in his work.
Well, he's going to say the same thing to you, because this is exactly how a book like this needed to be done, the kind of care and the time, with infinite patience and all that kind of thing. And when you did the various zodiacs, and there were hundreds of them throughout Washington D.C., you were the idea of putting them in order, I think, was super important, because they're not always in order when they're on various monuments. But when you see them on the various gates, and that, it makes it much easier to see the various ways they use to depict all of that. There's so much, friends, there's just so much in here. I would love to have gotten to the Federal Reserve and National Academy of Sciences. But then you have a memorial to Albert Einstein. You have great photographs of Einstein, and the celestial objects that are accurately positioned by astronomers. I think you had something like 2,500 of those.
Right, there's 2,700, and it's the largest zodiac in the world.
Just extraordinary.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time, but can we give them 30 seconds on this? What's your vision of the future of America?
Well, my prayer is that we reclaim that spirit of moral rectitude and integrity, of self-reliance, and a visionary spirit which flowed from the pen of Thomas Jefferson, from the heart of George Washington, from the mind of John Adams, from the blood and tears and sweat of those who built this country with no help, no interference from government.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'll talk to you again. And friends, see you next week. 21st Century Radio is produced by Hieronimus and Company. Our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. I'm Dr. Bob Hieronimus, and remember, shine your shoes and get a haircut.